Hi, welcome to the Julie Rowe Show. Today we have another great podcast plan, and I'd like to welcome Eric and turn the time over to you. How are you, Eric?
Doing great. Thanks, Julie. So, in this podcast, why don't we continue a conversation we've had? It's been ongoing for a good month or two now of covering the geographic events that take place in the United States in the future. So, to this point, we've discussed everything from Alaska along the West Coast. We've covered the South, the Midwest, and then in our most recent, you discussed the Northeast. So I guess that leaves us with one last geographic region in the United States, and that's the Southeast region. So, and I don't think it would hurt to overlap. If there's anything else you want to say about the New Madrid fault zone, and maybe recap a little on the Northeast, and then you can work your way south, or however you'd like to handle that. We've talked about 3 or 4 main categories of events, and those are namely earthquakes, plagues, and foreign invasions of troops. And so if any of those stands out to you, you can start with that.
Okay, sounds good. I'm trying to remember if we've already talked about Hawaii. Did we talk about Hawaii yet?
I don't think so.
Okay, so we'll do this one, and then we'll do one on Hawaii, or depending on how long we go with this one, maybe we'll include Hawaii. But
fair enough.
Anyway, let's go ahead. Thanks for your starting of this topic.
Yep.
Okay. Well, so the last podcast recording that we did discuss what I see in the Northeast. I want to reiterate that what I've talked about with Eric on these podcasts is not all encompassing. I don't want people to think that this is everything that's going to happen. It's limited to this. At a future point in time, I may decide to go back through state by state or a few states at a time or cities and pinpoint more specifics. I haven't really decided if that's something I want to do, because I don't want to
like
get
create
so
fear
specific to people.
Yeah,
exactly. That we create any more issues than the basics of just trying to get people to wake up. And I don't know that the specifics are really what matters, because what matters most is that people are waking up to the fact that we do have these conditions coming, and that they just prepare themselves the best they can given the personal revelation that they are given, and not relying on just what I see and what I'm telling people. Because if I mention something happening in the state of Washington, but I don't mention something happening in Texas or New Mexico, that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen there. So I don't want people to think that because I don't mention plagues specifically in their city, for instance, that it's not going to hit. The plagues are going to hit all over the world. They're going to hit all over the United States and come in full force in a lot of these cities. And so,
and probably by extension,
small towns.
That would involve foreign troops and earthquakes and other events as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, everything. Mm-hmm.
So
and
there's
dormant volcanoes and stuff like that.
So there's not exactly any geographic location that's exempt from these events.
Right. There's certain geographic locations that will be hit less, per se, but that could just be my perspective too. I don't know that for sure. Just when I'm looking at it, it seems like there are certain cities, certain states, certain regions that are hit and bombarded just immensely, and then others that seem to be where, and I think, excuse me, yawning, I think a lot of it's just the population density. It makes sense that if you have high population areas that they're going to get hit harder, but that's just because, if you have high population, then plague spreads faster and to more people, for instance. So,
right.
Anyway, so going back to, let's focus back on, like you mentioned, the Madrid and going up there. There are several states that will be affected by the Madrid fault line. If you study that fault line on a map and you see where it goes, you'll see as it goes up and along that Midwest region, and then it'll have splintering Oh, excuse me, Eric. I have the yawn so bad today. If people don't know that this is totally a spontaneous podcast because of all my yawning, I don't know. I got the yawns. I'll just say I'm at the lake in Branson, Missouri for my husband's family reunion, and I'm sleeping in a three-bedroom condo with my husband, a couple of his brothers, my mother and father-in-law, and then we have all the teenage boys sleeping in the living room. And they were up. They pulled an all-nighter last night, which means I was up a lot. So it's showing its effects today.
I think
I'm
the other
really
side.
tired.
I think they're trying to prepare you for things to come and camping situations or something, huh?
Apparently. Well, it's interesting. It's been me and my mother-in-law with five men and five teenage boys, all the uncles in this condo, and then the other two condos have all the young kids and the girls and my sister-in-laws. And so I've had quite a week. It's been fun, but anyway. So sorry, teenage boys staying up and playing video games and other things and playing board games till all hours of the night. We got here Saturday and it's Thursday, so this is several nights in a row of very little sleep for me because of a very fun condo with a bunch of teenagers. So.
Yeah. Well, okay,
anyway.
So you're talking about the New Madrid, and you keep talking about these splinters or fractures or something. What is that?
Yeah, like splintering off. The way I look at it is like you have the main Madrid, and then where the earthquake will go, it's like a main line that goes on up towards the Great Lakes. And then splintering off of that, other earthquakes that will go off, and that will cause flooding and other things. The tsunami that'll happen, or it's like a tsunami, right? It looks like a tsunami to me because it's the Mississippi River flows backwards, and I believe the Missouri River flows backwards too. It looks like that to me when I see it. So the Mississippi River flows backwards, and it floods the region. And then it causes essentially an inland ocean that's several miles wide. And it encompasses quite a few states, going from Missouri, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, parts of Kansas. So there are several states, and any of the states, Kentucky, Alabama. So there are states that go from the Gulf of Mexico. If you look at that, the Alabama going up, Florida and Alabama going on up through, going north of there towards St. Louis and on up to the Great Lakes, almost a straight line following that Missouri River. So look at the path of the Missouri River going on up, and then splintering earthquakes off of that. I call them splintering earthquakes because that's what it looks like. They just go one right after another, boom, 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 like with aftershocks and everything. And because that Madrid is like a 10. It's huge.
And as those splintering earthquakes occur, are they creating like geographic rifts that are then filled with water?
Yes. And a lot of them are along the lines of where there already are lakes and rivers, and so those widen, and the waterways widen, and then more, and then aquifers from under the ground, or the water table is quite high there, and so it doesn't take like where we live. We're about an hour and a half from Independence, Missouri, on the Kansas side, our property, and we sit up on a hill on bedrock, so our property will not flood. I've seen the lower part of our property on the dirt road where we live flooded. It will be entirely flooded. It'll prevent access from people coming in. We live about a mile and a half from the highway on I-35, and the highway will be broken up. People will still be able to pass through there after that, but it'll be really hard. And then we have a dirt road that's not too far from the highway, and due to all the debris from the earthquakes plus the water, in our area, I've seen across the street. Now, mind you, this is an hour and a half away from the main part of Madrid, right? So at that point in time, if you have a 10 and you have an hour and a half away, that's still pretty close when you're talking about a magnitude 9.5 to 10 earthquake. And so I figure, I don't know, maybe it's a 6, maybe it's a 6. I have no idea what it's going to be out by our place. But the property across the street from us has 180 acres, something like that. I don't remember exactly how many, and they have cattle. And I've seen several times that their cattle are going to be standing in ankle deep, if not mid-calf deep water once this happens.
Mm-hmm.
And that we will actually have some of our neighbors or those that are on our property at the time bring some of the cattle over to our property that's on higher ground to get those cattle out of the water.
Interesting.
And I find that interesting that they've shown me that we bring some of the cattle over to help rescue them and put them on higher ground, because our driveway goes up on a hill, quarter mile uphill. And so our house is protected, but the lower part of our property, for, a good 30 to 40 feet of the lower part of our property is flooded off of the roadway. The good news for me is if I stock up on supplies, then I can have them there for whoever needs them, but people won't be able to come through as easily to steal the supplies. So that's just one example that I've been given. I've also seen other properties. The town of Ottawa, Kansas, which isn't too far from us, we're not too far from Ottawa, and that entire town, there's a little river that goes through there. It's flooded before, and I've seen that will flood to capacity. It will overflow and flood the majority of downtown Ottawa. So that's just one example, not too far from me, and that's on the Kansas side. Again, that's about an hour and 15 minutes from Independence, Missouri. Independence, Missouri being entirely flooded. Downtown Kansas City having flooding. And
Julia,
cities like that all the way up,
Okay, sorry, I keep trying to interrupt you. Sorry.
That's okay.
Can I just ask this rift you're talking about, the tsunami area, like how wide would you say it is at its widest point? Do you have any concept of that distance?
Well, I picture it on a map right now. I can picture it in my head, but I don't have it to scale.
And that's okay. Would you say it's like a statewide, like say as wide as Alabama,
yeah,
or is it more like a couple miles on either side of the river? Or
it seems like it. I mean, it's an inland ocean. It's big. I see entire states flooded. I see, as far as the actual rift that stays, I don't know once some of the water recedes, but a lot of the water won't recede because of the shift in the ground of what's happened. I see on both the left and the right side of that corridor or that fault line, water overflowing into the states on both sides. And so I think the best thing to do, Eric, is for you and I to get a map out.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm with you in person, sometimes maybe the next time I go to Idaho or we can meet up somewhere in Utah or something, I can draw that out for you. I know we did that once briefly.
Yeah.
But I can see it on the map right now, and then maybe we can put that up for people.
Okay, but you've said some interesting things. This you've mentioned something concerning the time. So initially there's a huge surge of water, okay, and then it runs off after what, a couple weeks or something, and then
I don't know. I don't know how long it takes,
okay.
And I don't know how much of it. And it runs off and floods other areas, but I don't know how long it takes to recede, and it doesn't look to me like much of it recedes. I mean, it permanently changes the landscape, and it's permanently an inland ocean.
So we're talking about two major land masses in the United States then.
Yes, right. And there might be a few connecting points up, but from what it looks like to me, it's an inland ocean. It's a long inland ocean breaking up.
If what you're saying is true, then that's hundreds of miles across.
It feels that way to me.
I would guess 200 to 300 miles, based on what you're describing.
It's big enough that it makes it nearly impossible for those without aircraft or those without really, really good watercraft. It makes it nearly impossible for them to get to the other side of the United States.
Interesting. Okay, can you take us
Yeah.
to the east a little bit from there and maybe south a little?
Sure. So going to the east from there, then we have, if you go to the middle of the country on over and going east towards like the DC area. Now I see all kinds of bombs, some nuclear, um, biological weapons, and things like that that we've discussed previously in major cities, and again the plagues, which truly are biological weapons that have been spread. And then I see, because of the Madrid earthquake, other earthquakes going, because it shifts all the landmass, right, all the plates. And so then there's other earthquakes throughout the rest of the United States as well. It triggers, and those trigger volcanoes, those trigger tsunamis. So
You see
I see
volcanoes in the
tsunamis.
east?
Um, you know, I saw a few scenes with volcanoes, but it was hard to tell exactly where those were. Um, but if someone were to study the dormant volcanoes, then a lot of those dormant volcanoes are going to be activated. I see most of those in California, New Mexico, and Nevada. A lot of the earthquake. I mean, a lot of the dormant volcanoes I saw were in those states. A few in Arizona, but mostly, for whatever reason, most of those dormant volcanoes I saw, and in Washington State with Mount St. Helens and Mount Rainier, but dormant volcanoes in Nevada, New Mexico. Um, it looks like not far from the Panhandle. I couldn't tell if they were actually in Texas because there were so many happening so fast. It was hard for my brain to process what I was seeing, and it was so overwhelming.
So
Um,
as far as volcanoes, not so much on the east coast, maybe just a little bit.
well, I don't remember as much on the East Coast. There could be, but I don't remember them, because I was I was shown things from an aerial view, then closer up, then kind of regions and states and cities, and there's so many different scenes in my mind that I can't remember all of it. So, and I didn't write it down.
Fair enough. That's okay. Let's go back to the
Yeah,
east then. We're basically talking Kentucky, North Virginia,
right.
South
So
Virginia,
there's,
yeah,
for
Carolina.
those that have been out there, they know that there are, a lot of mountain ranges. Now, the Appalachians, I see anywhere where you normally get flooding, or that are prone to flooding, just expect that you're going to get a lot of flooding, and more so than usual. And then areas, with snowfall, again, those areas where you have snowfall, just expect you're going to get a lot of snowfall. The weather patterns are going to increase and change, they're going to intensify. Um, and those Appalachians, I see people going into the Appalachian Mountains to try to get away from the troops or to get away from, the cities. And so a lot of people going up to the Appalachian trails, and they actually get quite dangerous due to both weather and because there's so many people trying to escape there that in of itself becomes quite dangerous. But I do see a lot of people going, into the Appalachian Mountains. And on the southeastern coast, earthquakes and hurricanes. Hurricanes also up the coast, the east coast, all the way up north, even into New Hampshire. But that New York, D.C. area is going to get hit really hard with everything from tsunami to hurricanes to tropical storms that have come up or that have changed from hurricanes to tropical storms. And Florida will, with the earthquakes that'll happen and the tsunamis, the tip of Florida on the south side, the south end tip of Florida, will essentially look like it's detached from the rest of the United States because of the tsunamis and the flooding and the earthquakes and the shifts that happen there with tsunamis and other things. It's a combination of effects. And so kind of like in California, where the coast of California will look like it's falling off, the same thing will happen on the coast, on the East Coast, and especially in that Florida, Georgia area, or I'm not Georgia, North and South Carolina, and parts of Virginia. The coastlines will change because of the tsunamis and water that comes up onto the shoreline several hundred feet. Um, and I see that in Florida, where it looks like the tip of Florida has an island instead of being attached to the mainland.
So like that narrow, there's kind of a more narrow part in northern Florida. Maybe the water just kind of crosses that narrow part.
Yeah, it looks, it's a combination. It passes through that northern part, and then like the Orlando area stays, the center of the state stays fairly secure, other than from hurricanes and stuff like that. But as far as tsunamis, obviously they're far enough inland that the tsunami doesn't wipe them out. But any of the coastal lines, like in Miami and on the Keys and stuff like that, and going into Fort Myers and some of those places that are on the coastlines in the Gulf, you can just expect that there's going to be water damage and destruction. And then even going out to the Caribbean and Puerto Rico, well, it's not part of the United States, but Puerto Rico is, a territory. I do see Puerto Rico pretty much being destroyed. Most of Puerto Rico will be destroyed, and same with Caribbean islands. The oceans will rise, and there'll just be a lot. So, and in the Hawaiian Islands, a great deal of the Hawaiian Islands will be destroyed, and they'll have a lot of tsunamis as well. But they do have mountainous regions, so I see a lot of people escaping up to the mountains in those areas, and wherever they can, whether that be Puerto Rico or whether that be, the Caribbean, or whether it's in Hawaii or whatever, I see people fleeing on foot, great masses of people fleeing on foot to get away from rising waters and storms and stuff like that from the tsunami effects.
So I'd be curious, Julia, you got me thinking mapping here. If you could identify a water line that the water rises on one of the Hawaiian islands or something, and that could give us a sense of the depth increase of the ocean. I wonder if that would be possible.
When you and I get together, we can work on that. I don't want to say it right now off the cuff, but yeah, if I had a map in front of me, I could probably get a visual on that.
Interesting. Well, okay, you've got me wondering now about the vegetation, and the Southeast has such unique plants that are such a part, like peanuts and oranges and other citrus things and stuff, and I love the vegetation over there anyway, the hardwood trees and stuff. Do you think that these calamities will destroy those indefinitely, or do you think some of those things will come back after some time?
Some of them will be destroyed indefinitely, but I do believe that there will be quite a few that will be preserved, and that those that are living in those areas will find refuge. That there'll be mass casualties, but that the Lord has a plan, right? And so I see that it's going to be difficult, for instance, for us to get and utilize things on a global scale like we have been for a time, or to be able to ship things or take them by train, obviously. So the waterways will change and the land masses will change to make it so our commerce is going to change, and what we need to do to be able to get food to different places that we're used to having. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It does. What about, now you've mentioned earthquakes, volcanic, so these seismic kind of activities. What about concerning plagues or foreign invasions in the Southeast?
Similar issues, because I see those files being released in Yankee Stadium being one of the places that's going to be hit hard. There are stadiums in Florida. You can count on basically all the major stadiums in the United States being hit with biological weapons, because those are easy targeted areas. And so that, and schools and airports and places where there's high traffic. And so I do see that. And then when you add pestilence to the mix, especially when you've got floods and debris and dirty water, sickness just, spreads rampantly. So everything from malaria, right? Some of these diseases that haven't afflicted people on the American continent for a long time will kind of ramp up again, just because we won't have access to the hospitals and other medical facilities because of what's going on, and then people will be at home to try to care for themselves. They'll be on foot. They'll have open wounds where infection can spread and stuff like that.
I'm thinking of something a college professor, a geography professor, told me, that the entire United States is like one big plate, and the West Coast is rising while the East Coast is sinking. And you can kind of see that along the shoreline. It's marshy and swampy. And so I'm imagining, tell me if this sounds consistent. I'm imagining when this New Madrid fault goes, I'm imagining this big plate or this big table snapping in half, and it's almost like the East Coast kind of sinks in general.
Right, it does.
Kind of.
Yeah,
So
it goes lower. Yeah, because I see Staten Island, different parts of New York, and the DC area, and that whole Chesapeake Bay, Delaware, Connecticut, Rhode Island, all of those going underwater.
So it's kind of swampy, and I guess that would be prime breeding grounds for malaria and those other things you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so now what about the human activities? We've talked a lot about the natural things that would happen, but foreign troops and that kind of thing.
Well, the first thing when you said human activity that made me think of is I don't like it when people joke about the zombie apocalypse, because what I see with that is basically people who are mentally ill, or those who have gone crazy because of the stress, or that can't get their medications, or the elderly that have Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that. There's all these people that have need for medications, and they're so destitute. That combined with being crazy, one of the plagues literally causes people to go crazy. And so I see, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets throughout the United States with incapacitated due to mental illness or mental stress. And because of that, they just have nervous breakdowns and other issues. And there's no medication, there's no facilities, there's no one to care for them. So they're living on the streets, or they're going from house to house, marauding or trying to find shelter or find food in desperate need. And this opens them up for possession of evil spirits and entities and unclean spirits, which leads to what people joke about being the zombie apocalypse. But in reality, if you imagine somebody who's been in a war-torn area with natural disasters, their body's torn up and injured, and they are mentally ill, and they're living on the streets, they kind of look like somebody that came out of the zombie apocalypse.
Wow, that's interesting.
And they have had an evil spirit take possession of them. And so that's what I think of every time I see somebody joking about the zombie apocalypse. Is people, it's really not that funny.
Because it's not
if
too
you
far
saw what
from
I
the
saw,
truth.
right? If you saw what I saw and what they're going to do, and then you add to that the foreign troops and how they will, purposely create havoc and split families and try to recruit men and things like that, and capture and put people in caves and put people in lockdown facilities, put people in different places where you can see. And I have to be careful because I don't want to get myself in legal trouble. But basically, think of any kind of a large building where they could coerce you to go in and say that there's food or clothing or shelter for you, and then get you in there and lock you in. So as far as human activity, that's the negative side of it. On the positive side, I see a lot of people who are tested to the core and who do the right thing again and again and again, and they are serving constantly, and they're showing love and kindness, and they're really really helping other people out, people providing safe places for those who are coming through that don't have a home, people that provide safe houses um, for somebody to come get a glass of water, or that wash their hands or their face, or take a quick shower, or have a snack or a meal, or spend a night while they're on their way to another place. So there's just a lot going on. And of course, like in any disaster, we saw this in Hurricane Katrina, how many people took advantage of store owners and other people and went in and were marauding and thieving and stealing things from stores and stuff like that. Everything from toilet paper to TVs. And the ridiculous thing is the TVs aren't going to do anybody any good, but I see a lot of toilet paper being stolen. So
I want to ask you about the. I'm going to need to edit this. Just give me 1 sec to form this question.
Okay.
So I'm imagining, a family of 5 or something. Maybe they have 3 kids. They're on the East Coast. They've managed to escape a lot of the calamities. They're barely getting by, but they are getting by. And there's this huge rift, this big ocean they have to cross if they want to go west and find safety. I guess it's making me think and wonder, for those who largely get by, what sort of help might they see? Do you see divine intervention taking effect in people's lives like that?
Absolutely. Every day. They've shown me hundreds of stories of families that I've seen, or individuals who upon praying and seeking divine help, have everything from angelic ministers to translated or resurrected beings helping them. And then also, more often, just kind people that are mortals that are helping them get from point A to point B. And I've seen, and there's cases like this now, right? Miracles where people, like someone's in a car accident or they're in a fire or something and they should have died, but some unseen force from the other side of the veil lifts them out and puts them on the other side of the car, or takes them out of the car and puts them on the side of the street, or takes them out of the house that's burning. And so I see a lot of that.
Can you, now I want to take it one step deeper and ask, do you see, when you see those things and these divine experiences happening, do you see the expressions on people's faces, or do you sense their intense prayers, or their pitiful situation on their knees before the Lord, begging, pleading?
Yes, and my experience is it's as if I'm there, so the emotion that comes with that. And in some cases, it's mere shock that something happened to them, and they are trying to understand how something divine like that could occur to rescue them. In other cases, they have a good grasp on that, and they realize that that is reality, and they're just eternally grateful, and they're very humbled, and they accept that. In a lot of cases, they're praying for divine intervention, and they're going along their journey, and they're given assistance from whatever source. And it's not until hours or days, or in some cases weeks or months later, that it dawns on them who it was that was assisting them.
Interesting. I love the idea of those people making it and then telling their story, and then just uplifting and edifying all those that they tell, and then everyone kind of collectively rejoices in the Lord for his goodness to them.
I do too. Thank you for those questions, Eric. I think it's about time to wrap it up. Do you have anything else for today that you think we should discuss?
I don't think so. Thank you again. I know it's an emotional experience for you, essentially reliving some of the horrific things you've seen. And so I want to thank you personally for putting yourself out there like that. So we really appreciate you, Julie. And I know many of your listeners do too.
Thank you, Eric, and I appreciate those listeners that are taking the time to learn more about what they can do to help and what they can do to prepare so that whenever this stuff happens, we can gather together and help each other out and be of strength rather than weakness. Thank you.
Great. We'll catch you next time.
Sounds good. That's all, folks.